Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Hal Bradley, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, this is neat, man. We were talking a little before off mic about some of the connections I'm about to reveal that we have. We have both done very dangerous work in our lives. Obviously, you know, with my work as a spy, and I worked outside the wire. Gosh, as much as anybody you're going to find. But you did sort of your own version of that, you know, working on operations to do transnational movement of drugs, if we're going to be honest. I will say this, though. You were not the first Central South American guy to have a burro as their primary means of transportation on the show. We had a guy named Colonel John McKay from the Marines, and he grew up and he learned to speak Quechua and Spanish fluently, and just had an incredible life. His dad worked in mining. Well, there's a fun connection already.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, he lives in Sacramento, teaches at Sac State. I, like you, went to Sac City College and lived in Sacramento for a while. So I don't know, I forget. I think, are they Vikings? I think maybe over there.
Yeah, well, we do have commonalities, don't we, sir?
We sure do. I'm not even done yet. I also am a graduate of Tigerland.
No way.
Yes. Yeah.
I was there February 1972. You know, they shut that program down after we cycled through that.
Yeah. Well, they opened it in terms of like trying to get, I guess, combatant advisor to be out in the battlefield, some combat experience. And so It's not the Tigerland you went through. I mean, it is the same place physically, the same archway, same everything. But modern combat is a lot different. It's more spoke and hub. And as you go along those spokes, Air Force guys need to know how to patrol properly and call for fire and all these things. So we have that. And also, we're both Army veterans.
Yeah, thank you for your service, brother. You know what that means to men like us. Appreciate you.
Yeah.
If I could mention, we have another veteran in the room right now. His name is Bob. He's a hospice patient of mine, former prisoner of war, captured in 1963 in Vietnam. So I'd just like to give him a shout out and thank him too for his service.
I'm so glad you did that, because I was going to definitely ask you to talk about Bob briefly, because
thank you.
As we start to lose these generations of previous warriors, anything we can do to bring attention to them, I think it's critical just to remember a guy like Bob or his peers and everything. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because being a POW, I don't know, that's one of the hardest forms of service there is.
Well, him and I have.
So we have all these overlaps, and I think
I too was kidnapped and captured on foreign soil. So the bond between this gentleman and I is just as close as if we were blood relatives. You would understand that, Pete. You've been out there in the foreground of danger and the type of life that we've survived. Hence the book.
Yeah, it's crazy. Your book is called Crisis Victory, and you, among other things, ran drugs at a high level all over the nation, and you worked internationally between obviously Mexico and the United States, but also I guess you had some dabble in Canada. Talk, I guess, a little bit about just a sort of a survey of what you did in that era of your life, and then we can kind of go back in time and kind of start from the beginning and work our way forward. Because have you already sold the movie rights yet? I mean, because it's incredible. What everybody's about to hear is incredible.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we do have someone that may have an interest in turning it into a movie. But let me take you back to 1969. I was living outside of Seattle in Edmonds, Washington. I got caught smoking a cigarette in the bathroom with two other friends. And back in 1969, that warranted removal from the school for up to a half a year. My mother had a friend who owned a mining corporation on the Durango-Zacatecas border in Mexico. And they thought it would be better than having me just walk the streets to go down and work in the mines. So I was sent down to Mexico into the state of Durango. I lived in a small village of about 200 to 250 people called Walterio. And the mining camp was just about 2 miles north of that area. The exposure that I had, as you were well aware, I had a little burro. That was my transportation. And I used to ride it in the mountains along the poppy fields and up in the canyon areas where the Chowari Indians were growing marijuana. And bear in mind, I'm 15 years old at this time in my life. So this is an impression time of life where things imprint on you. And I spent about 14 months down there. My brother was wounded in action in Vietnam. I got word, so I headed back to the States immediately to Bremerton Naval Hospital where they had my brother. In that moment, I decided to go into the United States Army and serve my country also. So at the age of 16, I got my GED completed and then took my vows a week after I was 17 and headed to Fort Knox, Kentucky. From Fort Knox, Kentucky, I went to my AIT in Fort Polk, Louisiana, but I was put into a program in a place called Tigerland. And what this was returning Green Berets that were coming out of Vietnam at that time and in that moment. And they were taking some of us to specifically prepare us for the type of combat experiences that we could expect going into Vietnam. Fortunately, after I graduated the program was so intensive that they did shut it down and stop that type of a training. But I went from there to Fort Benning, Georgia Airborne School, got my wings. And then from there, I was deployed to Germany, where I was stationed with the 509th Airborne there for almost 2 years. Upon return, I went to Sacramento City College on my GI Bill, something you and I have in common. And I went to, we had a winter break. And in that winter break, I decided to go down and visit the village that I had lived as a child. Upon my arrival in the village, they threw this great feast and a big festival. And then one of the kids that I had grown up with in the village approached me about bringing a large car down to Mexico, and they would put in compartments and I could start running kilos of marijuana into the United States. This is 1975 at the time. And I thought, well, what the heck? It's a great idea. We're all pot smokers at college. No big deal. Well, it was a fatal decision.
Hold on. Okay, hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it is not a good idea to run drugs for the cartel. I know that you're pot smokers and everything, but how, so one, you talk in your book about, and the book's fantastic, everybody. You really got to get it. Crisis Victory. I'll put the link up here in a second. But how did that village, how did it get into your heart? I mean, you don't spend that much time there. Impressionable, sure, but 6 months, that's just a tiny fraction of your life. Why did it stick?
I was almost a year and a half, Pete, in the village.
Okay.
Before my brother was wounded in combat. But what happened upon my return, I did get the first load north across the border, got it up into California, the Sacramento region, turned it into $80,000 in less than a week and said, oh my God, this is my career. And I absolutely loved the thrill of running the border. I loved the thrill of setting up distribution. I just thoroughly became encompassed in this industry. So as the years went by, ultimately I picked up an airplane, started flying out of the Sonora Desert down into the country, and then actually took a trip with a friend of mine who was out of Alabama. He had a 10 turboprop, and we went all the way down to El Rio Negro in Colombia, just on the outskirts of Medellin, picking up kilos. I confess I only did it one time. I had my own network going through Sinaloa and Jalisco at that time. By that time, I was approached by I was in Jalisco and Guadalajara when we got a phone call to head over to Culiacan, Sinaloa. They wanted to connect me with somebody. And I want to add at this point now, for legal reasons, there are a couple things that I fictionalized in the book to protect the innocent and to protect the names of some of the people involved. But I was exposed to the cartel at that time. They wanted to use me for stateside distribution rather than just being smuggling. But I had such an affinity for smuggling at that time that I only half regarded their information because I was working with other people. So I continued on in the smuggling industry of it, but I did start setting up safe houses, started distribution sites. And then in 1979, cocaine became introduced into our trade route. At that point, I did a couple runs with cocaine and then backed off and started focusing primarily on setting up distribution. And as you had stated earlier in our private conversation, it stemmed through Canada, halfway across the United States. I was moving between 250 to 350 kilos at a time in large unit measure. I don't even know how many tons I dumped into the market up here, but it was pretty extensive. I had an organization designed with other mules that were doing stateside transport, crossing into Canada and doing Canada drop shipments up there. And this was about the time that I met with El Chapo Guzman, as is discussed in the book. I first met him. I met him at a mafia wedding just outside of Culiacan on a ranch. I was sitting at the table of bosses to be introduced to him formally. And my wife and the wives and mistresses of the other bosses were put at another table under armed guard. And as the wedding was playing, all of a sudden we saw a bunch of soldiers come into the wedding encampment. And then within seconds, El Chapo Guzman, walked in to present a gift to the couple. He came over and paid respects at the table of bosses to each of the independent bosses working in his organization. And at that point in time, I was formally introduced to him as a, quote, trusted friend from the Pacific Northwest.
Let me ask a couple questions here before we go further. And hello to the dog.
Yeah.
We may get interrupted by ducks over here. I'm right on the water. But I want to ask you, how was it getting stuff across the border? I mean, back then, less security, less everything. Give us an idea of what that was like, specifically getting over from Mexico into the United States.
Well, in the early 1970s, we didn't have the protocols that are established by the Department of Justice via U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. A lot of it was, and I was trained in this early, you would hit the 28-kilometer zone coming in from southern or central Mexico. You'd pass 28-kilometer zone and you'd scrape the turista stickers off your car, pull into a border town, run the car through a car wash, take a couple shots of tequila or whatever, just to kind of calm the nerve, and then spray deodorant on your exposed skin so you would not accidentally sweat. And they had psychology signs as you would approach going through the customs clearance that would say, if you're caught smuggling drugs, you could do 40 years, these kind of informative things that would hit you subconsciously and psychologically. So I was taught to look them directly in the eyes, to wear sunglasses that weren't too dark, that weren't too light, throw a pinata and a couple bottles in the back seat. And one time I actually used a Prensa pass or a press pass stuck on the window. I was running a load with a man who wasn't actually a press member. So he was teaching me in his smuggling attributes how to deflect too much focus and concentration on the person in the car. The other thing we would do is we would wait just before shift change. And then we would pick the lane that we would observe that would be letting the most cars through because it's the end of their day. They were tired. And we would just jump in those lanes and go for it. And never once did I ever get caught. And I can't even begin to figure how many times I crossed the Mexican-American border. Later on, I picked up a Cessna.
Hold on. I have a question. So Did you try to be a gray man going through, or were you trying to also I'm a big smile, wave, be recognizable, but be unknown? That was sort of my philosophy when I did things out in the open.
Yeah, I stayed pretty gray, actually. I would try to deflect any attention, but I would set objects up in the vehicle that would make them look to the object, such as I said about a pinata or other things that people pick up on the border crossings. I diffused any attention toward myself as much as possible. I would answer the questions I would ask immediately and very calmly, not rushed, not excited. You understand neurolinguistics. You've been out in the field. You know how those things pick up. And these are the things that I was briefed, schooled, and trained by the cartels to be in that moment. And it always worked.
And just for some context, in that time, there was less focus on that. There was, less attention. So when we think, it's just a bunch of rubes at the border, the reality is they're completely understaffed, underprovisioned to be able to. If you take a car off of the road to inspect it, that's the rest of your shift. And if you're at the end of your shift and not in any way compelled to do that kind of extra work, it's not hard to go, this person is just trying to do their 8 hours, get out of here and not have a big hassle. And so if you can find those gaps, for sure, you can exploit that. When you met Chapo, was he Chapo at that point? Did you know?
Oh, yeah.
You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I was never really impressed. I knew other drug lords. The Arellano Felix syndicate up in Tijuana in 1969 and 1970, I actually knew Ramon Arellano Felix when he was only 6-7 years old. His uncle would come up and visit with the man in the village that was responsible for my safety. And his uncle was a very famous drug lord in that time. And of course, we're just kids. I didn't understand in my innocence just exactly what it was. But yeah, Ramon came up 3 times in the time that I was down there, and later became one of the triad members of the Tijuana cartel that ran it. So I've basically been exposed to those type of people. So there was no excitement meeting El Chapo. It was just, I recognized him as a boss. He was the jefe, and commanded that respect as such. The second time I was going to
say, do you have a sense that the noose is kind of getting around your neck too? I mean, as you get further up, you get further ensnared into this thing. Did you have a sense for that at all, or no?
I did, and I was down in Culiacan. They were moving 6,000 kilos north of cocaine at that time, a 6-ton shipment. It was already headed north, and I was invited down to talk about doing some of the distribution and holding some of it in various house sites. And I recall being very concerned about it. My LA counterpart came down there with me, and we just were worried about having to move so much weight in the category time that they would allot for that much of a movement to go. And this is the way the cartels work. They constantly pressure you. They constantly push you. And you have to do exactly every single thing they say, because if you don't do everything, you're going to end up another victim of theirs. And I have witnessed over the years many, many victim events. So I was very disciplined with regard to my responsibility. But while I was in Culiacan, the man that we're down meeting got a phone call, and it was from one of the officers working for El Chapo at that time. And Chapo was up in a ranch called La Junta, and he heard that I was down there. And he says, "Hey, listen, I want to talk to that Gabacho that lives there on the Canadian border, so bring him up." So we took out of town, and we went to see Chapo. We went through a couple of mafia checkpoints, cartel checkpoints. And once I was there, I was presented to him formally again. And he sat me down in his lounge there, part of his office. And he said, "How do you get my cocaine into Canada? And is there a market in Canada to where we can trade cocaine for that Vancouver, British Columbia marijuana?" Because they were at that time in Chicago getting $6,000 a pound for the pot. So it was a real lucrative, it was an amazing time and very lucrative for him. So I assured him that I would go into it, and I would check it out, and I'd get the information back down there. And that was the last time that I saw Chapo Guzman. It was only about 3 or 4 months later when they said that I had owed them this debt. And I think in the book it shows $1 million, the debt. So I put together the money, went down there to pay off the debt, gave them hugs and handshakes, said, "I'm done with this." You know, I had a wife, I had new children coming into my life. I didn't want back in the first place, but I was forced back after prison. And I went back up north, and when I got home, I had 2 soldiers with a van load of kilos sitting in my driveway telling me to go to work. Well, as a boss, I didn't have to accept it. And I told them we were heated up. Get that load the hell out of here. I had a little over $3 million in cash at that time in my bedroom, and went up and dumped it in the car on a payment owed. And the very next day, I made the decision to walk into the U.S. Attorney's office and take the whole thing down. The threat assessment based on seeing that type of people in my driveway, knowing full well they were not going to honor the agreement, the commitment that was made. I was just too much of an asset. Like you said earlier, as you climb that ladder, you become non-replaceable. And they knew that. They said, "Aquí en su corazón vive la sangre de la ciudad." In your heart pumps the blood of our village. And as a result of that, there was no choice. I would have had a dead family in less than a week had I not made the decision I made. So yeah, it was a viable choice to make based on the pressures that I was dealing with in that moment. I came home free.
Can you go back a little bit in time and talk about, you talked about some of these victims, and in the book you start to chronicle it. I don't want to give everything in the book away, but you know, at this point when you walk in to the law's office, you know what happens to people that go against these guys. Can you talk a little bit about the things
I have seen?
And
I've seen, brother, I have seen so much horror and so much high level violence. And the cartels don't just want to kill, they like to torture. They like to institute fear as a viable resource to control their regions, their environments, and the people that are under them. I have witnessed horrible death. I have witnessed, I can remember one time vividly that stays with me, 3 Rottweilers. They threw this guy in a corral with him and chewed him to death. And why they were sitting there all laughing about it. And these are 15, 16, 17-year-old soldados. And they were all making bets as to which dog was going to deliver the kill blow. I can remember one night having dinner at a friend's hacienda where they loaded a guy in the back of a rig. And before I was done with dinner, the rig came back without him. I've seen mangled and mutilated bodies that were hung over overpasses. Hell, I've driven under them when they were hanging, mutilated and mangled. I had a very close associate of mine who was grabbed one time and with two other people. They poured gas on all three of them, and they let the two burn to death. And just before he was dead, they put the fire out so he'd be in agony the rest of his life. And then they took all of his fingers at the same time. On and on. I've seen so much of that stuff, Pete, that I don't want to upset the audience with too much more detail on that.
Right. But
yes, I'm fully aware of the danger. As you know, recently I had a contract, a kill order put on me, June 7th. If we're not getting ahead, since we're in this conversation right now,
yeah.
I was executed out back of my home here on the night of June 7th. I was left dead in the moment as I was dying. I accepted my death, and I was okay with it, and I felt a wonderful peace coming on me as the blood was flowing out of the body. There was brain matter laying on the street from the knife stabs into the brain cavity. But what was something jump-started my life, Pete, and it brought me back, and I was able to crawl up the stairs and get behind my safety gates, and 911 wanted in. My son was in the house. I hollered to him, and it was a very hard experience for my son to witness such a thing. But as you know, when we're working under organized criminals that are as sophisticated as these cartels out of Mexico are, they always like to send bloody and violent. That is the message, bloody and violent. And I did die that night. I don't know why I came back. And I have a PTSD doctor at the VA hospital that has been working with me for some time on related traumas. And it's amazing how I don't even care about being alive anymore, if that makes sense to you and your audience. The book defines it a little bit more detail. Yeah,
Same.
You've been there. You've been there. I sensed it.
Had therapy yesterday, and I am far too comfortable with my own demise. Yeah. Far too comfortable.
Yeah, you get to that point in life.
I absolutely get that, and you know, in a lot of ways, and I don't know if you experienced this, but there's yeah. Well, what I want to say is you know, a lot of my combat peers will openly say, like, be in combat than deal with this.
Yes, I understand. Believe me, I've been a hospice chaplain.
I know combat. I know where to go.
Yes,
and this one is oftentimes it's excruciating and agony.
Yes, it's horrific if you allow it to be. My book, Crisis Victory, is designed to walk you through tragic crisis events in the moment, and to be able to recover successfully at the end. And I believe, as you would also, I'm sure, these type of books can only be written by people that have gone through multiple near-death experiences, have faced crisis events of such an enormity and such a caliber that this information can save other lives. And this is what motivated me into the creation of Crisis Victory. But I would also like to add, brother, that I've been certified and ordained with hospice for almost 25 years now. In the last 23 years, I've taken countless people through the dying process. As stated earlier, I have a friend and brother here right now who's in final stage of life and fully acceptance with it, like we would be. And having the death experience and surviving dying and coming back has really enlightened me in a humble sort of way as to regard to the countless people I've taken through the dying process. And in that last moment, how they'll smile and they'll thank you or tell you they love you. And then they let go because they have hit one of the 5 stages of the dying process, the acceptance phase of it. And I can't reiterate that enough, how this near-death experience has now benefited my hospice counseling. But I also work in homeless camps, as you've probably seen in the book. And this is my 19th year working with people that are struggling with so many multiple exotic issues in life. And to be able to sit down at a campfire at night and watch 3 people share a needle and put an arm around them and never judge them, but by example, show them the love of Jesus Christ. A young lady reaching her arm out of a tent. This picture stays in my mind, signaling the next guy to come into that tent to abuse her flesh so she can get another $10 hit in her arm. And I have seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these things. over the years, but I have gained and developed their trust and their respect. And as I enter into these camp environments, I don't ever judge anybody at all. First and foremost, Jesus didn't judge me. I'm not going to judge you. But the experiences of the past life that you and I, men like us that have lived in such dangerous and horrific environments, it's amazingly beautiful how the love of Jesus Christ can turn that and convert that into a tool of wisdom, if you will, guiding other people through such extensive processes.
I wanted to take a moment and point out, you said the words multiple near-death experiences. You and I both know, like, we are fortunate to have more than 7 lives, and not that everybody gets 7 anyhow, but there is something to that. And I'm curious what your thoughts are. Did you have to go down this path? I mean, I know you're a man of faith. So did God put you on this excruciating path, nearly dying, seeing all this death and destruction, getting all this ill-gotten money, from the drugs and everything? Was this your path? You could do this work that you're doing now, helping human souls either transition from life to death or from wherever they're at to the next place?
That's a very good question, and I thank you for asking that. My conversion was prompted by the drug cartels in Mexico. At the moment that I made the decision to take down the threat against my family, I wasn't some rat or some snitch running around telling on everybody. I want to make that very clear to your audience. I was laser focused on the targets that put my family in imminent danger. And I just grabbed a bigger baseball bat than they had. I'm former military like you. We know the power of our government if it's used in proper accord. So I exercised that power and I went after him and I hit him as hard as I could. But getting back to the question in hand, I can say that my conversion was a result of the evil world and the horrific world that I had survived and come out of. The moment of conversion, when I couldn't take it anymore, gave the burden to Christ. There was a transformation that is literally indescribable because I had an absolute belief in that moment. And I took my years in prison, did my seminarial studies, my first stages of the studies, became a certified hospice counselor. I was in the press, I was on TV, I was in lots of newspapers. It was quite an amazing journey. And my job in the education department was to help other prisoners get their GEDs and take people through those processes to come out better. In my last year, I was transferred out of Springfield Medical Center to Leavenworth Federal Prison for my last year and was allowed to plug in with hospice organizations outside of the prison. We started creating these 10-week courses where we could certify men getting ready to re-enter back into society, but putting a love installation in their heart to benefit humankind, to be looked at with a personal self-esteem that was growing daily, and to exchange the type of people that would have come out. It was an amazing program. And we were successful in doing 4 cycles before I was released from prison. So yeah, the conversion came as a result of the evil world that I had departed from.
Was this God's plan from you from day one, from the moment you were smoking that cigarette in school? Was he trying to get you to this point?
Well, we know that God has a hand in every motion of our life. We do know this. As to whether or not he gives us free will, and it talks about this in the Bible. And he also says that the planet, he gave the earth to the devil. These are why we have snares and traps and toils and stumbling blocks in our daily journey through life. But he also gave you and I free will, brother. And as a result of that free will, we make our decisions that puts us on the various crossroads that we have to accept, and to include the consequences as a result of the acceptance of the crossroad we delivered ourselves to. But God most definitely has his hand in it. He reveals himself in his season, not our season. And when I had survived all of the experiences I had gone through, given my life to Jesus Christ, and had surrendered I did it October 19th, 1994 in a prison cell when I dropped to my knees. And it was sincere. I was true. I couldn't handle it. I just had a contract put on my life. My wife walked in to divorce me. She was a very decent woman, never understood my world, could not believe that she married into the mafia, as she put it. And so I lost everything. Everything was gone. And it was a perfect time for a rebuilding. And it's like what he did with Moses, wandering for 40 years out there to pass a generation on. The same thing with men like you and me. Once we recognize his truth, then the journey becomes apparent and obvious that we take our wisdom, our skills and experiences and devote it to giving him the glory through how we institute ourselves graphically with people out there in need. So it was a no-brainer for me. I've never looked back ever. I've never questioned that he is real, and that what he does is he takes that which is bad to convert it to that which is good. As I said, I don't go to a homeless camp with a Bible in hand. I go to a homeless camp with Christ in heart, and I do it by example. And this is where the trust gets built up. And you saw in my book where I've had rape victims dropped off at my door in the middle of the night, someone ringing the doorbell and taking off. And they'll come to me instead of going to an emergency room because they have felony warrants and they're afraid they're going to, be taken into custody and they can't get that fixed the next day. Well, they know that Pastor Bradley does not judge them. All I do is serve them. And I give God the glory on every service, brother. That's just the way it is.
Well, thank you for doing that from all of us out here in humanity, because we need folks like that. We're wired similarly in a lot of ways. When I go into a conflict zone, I do my best. And it took me a long time to learn this. I had to screw this up, and I'm not saying I still don't screw it up, but I had to learn to reduce my ego, not judge, because again, if you want to go biblical, there before the grace of God go I. If I lived in an Afghan village, I can't say I would act differently. You've been to villages far removed from the Western world. And when you accept that, when you accept those people for who they are, where they are, how they are, you start to be embraced by their trust. And so as a spy, it sounds counterintuitive, but I focused my effort on building trust and testing that trust to make sure it was real, and working from that point at the pace that they could with the mechanisms that they had in place. How do I use their cultural norm to accomplish our combined goal? I'm still going to always work for the commander. I'm still always trying to protect, the service members. But if I can do that with their mechanisms, it is easier than me creating new mechanisms for all of them. It's just like, what's the path that works for you guys? And that same kind of non-judgmental, I could go sit with I can go sit with junkies and be like, this is where you're at right now. You need to take these drugs. I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I'm just going to hug you. And if you're interested in help, what kind of help could I help you find? What kind of help do you already have access to yourself? Just shut up and listen. That's how I approach. It doesn't sound like what a spy does, but that's how I approach it.
Yeah, and neurolinguistically speaking, it makes nothing but sense. In these environments that I've spent 19 years in the camps, what I do is I allow them to bring the information to me instead of extracting information from them. This creates a cultural relationship of trust. And trust is vitally important. As you well know, when we walk into an environment that we are not a part of that environment, and they're going to sense that, smell that, and respond accordingly to that. We are different. So what I try to do is be as complacent as possible, talk about that which I know they would have an understanding and an enjoyment and conversation. And as you say, never, of course, judge, just to be there for them. I mean, when I'm cleaning abscesses from someone that's blown their arms and legs up through doing musculo injections and things to this nature, I'm happy to clean up the abscesses and talk to them about that which they want. I recently had a prostitute that showed up here, former prostitute, former heroin addict, that her husband had overdosed in one of these camps, and I took a Narcan kit and reversed it. They came by here in September, and I hadn't seen them for 3 years. They were both off the drugs. She was no longer prostituting. They actually had a home. They had children. Their life was so much better, and it was all as a result of that night where he almost died from the overdose. And somebody that he never even knew took that loving and compassionate moment to not only revive him, but to extend a hand and a welcome to him, to my home. And resultant to those type of actions, so many other doors start to envelop and develop and open up for us. And this is the true way of ministering and outreach services in these hostile environments in these camps. Because make no mistake, you don't want to walk into that environment unless you know what you're doing. It can be very, very dangerous. But it's all
like
good.
You said, you're not from that environment, and they expect people to fail them. That's what they've been taught. That's what they've experienced. And you don't even get to build off-ramps for them until they do trust you. And I know from my experience, working in a conflict zone where people don't ever have enough, you can't rush the trust process, because you are literally dealing with abused people, and whether they're kids, adults, whatever it is, there's an ocean of abuse, and you got move too quickly. And it's not about what I need to do. It's about where they're at, what's possible there. Because someone who no longer cares if they're going to live, if they inject this needle this time, next time, whatever, you can't change that in an instant. You are not in charge of their of their recovery. You are in charge of saying, "I'm here. I trust you. I care about you." That's what I think.
I believe, and this is what I preach as a guest pastor in the pulpit many times. We were only given two commandments by Christ. One was to love God the Father, and the other one, brother, is for you and me to love each other and not be in conflict. And what you're dealing with in these camp environments like that, you're dealing with, first off, low self-esteem. And what you have to do in order to give them progression from the low self-esteem scenario is to let them know that they have worth, to let them know that they are valued. But most importantly, let them give the information to you. And then you develop the information in accordance to the independent case that you find yourself working with. But love overcomes everything, brother. It is about the love. You would know that.
I do. I love love, and I love leaning on it, because there is nothing that love can't handle. I want to go back in time a little bit, though, because you said some important things that I think are good parallels and good illustrations for people that wouldn't get this, because the drug stuff is sexy, and that's why we start there. But the real work that you're doing now is right here. Someone who's damaged or living in a place like the camps, or my place, the villages of Afghanistan, or whatever it is. So I would sometimes, on occasion, and I say this because I think you'll appreciate it. I'm with the military, and so I wouldn't just go Lone Ranger out for the heck of it. Sure. But there would be times when I would place my life in the care of someone local to create deeper bonds separate from the Army. It's not something I would advise any service member ever do. But I was particularly gifted at this. I have more time outside the wire than any of them. Oftentimes, many of them combined didn't have as much time outside the wire. And so I knew how to put myself in the safety of their culture, of their honor. And then that unlocks for them the ability to host me on their terms, on their turf. And then I would return the favor and bring them onto the camp. And get this, I would bring Afghan elders on the camp, and I would go to the Army and I would say, "You're not going to search this guy. You're going to call him by this name, like this respectful title, and we're just going to walk him through. And then I'm going to feed him, because normally they would always have to feed us, but I'm going to feed him. And if he wants ice cream, he gets ice cream. If he wants to take muffins back to his kids, he takes muffins back to his kids. But he's going to be a big deal on this camp today." And when was the last time that guy was a truly big deal where he got to walk by security? And these guys, I wouldn't do this with people I didn't have trust with. Right. And so these elements of allowing them to be something big, or to, allow them to protect me, to put my life in their care, game over. I will beat anybody. If we're out in the field collecting, I will beat anybody, because I can do that reliably and repeatedly.
Amen. Of course. You have to realize back in 2001 to 2003, I was working on my doctoral dissertation, and my doctoral dissertation was involved in the implementation of hospice to the homeless. Very interesting course program. So I did 3 winters instead of 2. My bishop actually had me do an extra winter before he'd sign off on the dissertation. And this is when my ability to start discerning the actual need preparation scenarios to approach the people that are, of low self-esteem and that are in these very, very dangerous environments, and to learn to listen with the 2 ears instead of the one mouth operating all the time. And this is a very important component when you approach people that are in such a negative stress scenario in their life circumstances. So with that being said, I'm honored to give God the glory every day of my life and to serve his kingdom and his communities, and to try to pass on an example of what real love and real understanding and real compassion, and where it comes from, most importantly, is truly about. And once you have that spirit in your heart, nothing takes that spirit from you, brother. The man that executed me out here the night of June 7th and completed, I was nothing but a name written on a piece of paper for a soldier that was assigned to kill me. And after 2 days of coming out of the comas and all the stuff that I went through with regard to the attack, immediately I forgave him and just felt a compassion for him. These are the confirmations that tell us that truly we have been delivered into safety through Christ. So amen to that, brother. And I hope that God touched his heart and moved him on. you and I have been that type of person. We have survived from those type of environments. We understand that a name on a piece of paper has no connection to what he feels or thinks about you or me as an individual. He's a soldier doing a job, plain and simple. And
yeah, you're competing at a life and death level, and
of course you are.
There's no compromising. Yeah.
Well, and there's been two recent attempts since June to formalize the kill order against me, and it's just such a blessing from day to day to live with the knowing that I can step out that door, but I do feel the shield of Christ around me. I'm very, very attuned. I used to have a private investigation agency. It's on file here in Olympia, Washington, called Surveillance Services Northwest. It was a gift from federal agents to arrange for me to take some time in the domestic sector after my captivity and what I went through with regard to what they did to me and their torture techniques on me. So, yeah, I get it. I mean, it's like we take these gifts, these talents, these abilities, but most importantly, glorify God through the action, brother. We don't take credit for nothing. It's not our credit to take. It's his credit to give that opens another door for yet another victim of circumstance to be able to feel comfortable enough to come forth. And a reputation grows, brother. Eventually people start hearing, hey, Pastor Bradley, you can go and talk to him and he's not going to call the cops on you, or he's not going to take you to the hospital against your will. He's going to be there for you the way you need him to be there for you, with clear and concise understanding. And over 19 years now of doing this type of work, it proves itself. It proves itself. That love overcomes everything. It does.
It does.
And I love all of them.
Yeah. Yeah. How is it living with a constant mark on you? Because even if there isn't a piece of paper, you don't know that. You never know that. You have to always assume that there is someone hunting you. How is that burden for you?
Well, if we're truly walking in the Lord, we know that the burdens and the yokes upon us that are given to us through the unholy one, which is the guidance of that part of the world, we don't live in fear. We just live in more cautionary sense. I pay attention to my as a former owner of surveillance services, a private investigation agency. I'm an expert in surveillance and counter surveillance. I have 17 years with the Department of Justice, more time than most about any agent I've ever worked with in the field. They don't have 17 years out there. Contractors like myself do. So you take your skills and your abilities, and most importantly, brother, your faith. And this is how you stay alive. Because yes, I am targeted right now. I have been targeted since I did not die that night. A kill order is a kill order. You understand what that is. It has to be completed. So I don't live afraid of it. I live with the expectation I'm a little bit more dialed in on how to save myself and preserve myself than that which is coming at me. So it's all good, brother.
Yeah.
I live with
There's
joy
this
in my
other
heart
parallel.
every day.
That is, joy, wonder, love.
Yes.
If you can feed off those things, you're going to be good. There's another parallel here with this. People say, well, aren't you afraid when you go out onto the battlefield? Because I primarily, I have a platoon with me or some kind of security element oftentimes when I would do this work. But there are many times when I'd walk out with no pistol because they were there to protect me. And it's like, are you terrified? I'm like, no, I want to be different. I'm with these guys, but I'm also not this offensive weapon. So there are hundreds of patrols where I had no weapon at all. And when you go out with these things, it's already too late. If they decide to ambush you and your 20 friends, 50-50, maybe less than that you survive because there's just no help coming. And when you do that enough times, and this is what you were saying earlier, when you've been out more than the experts who don't go out because they have paperwork to do, they have plans to so like you, I was out so much, I developed this innate sense, and I wouldn't say it's innate, it's describing it to somebody else, but this developed sense of when there's danger, when there's not, when there's a risk worth taking, when it's like, hey, we'll just come back tomorrow. All these things, these individual choices where you're literally preventing harm in the blind. You don't even know that, but just by saying something in this person's manner says, get out of, I can't say it to you, but get out of town because it's dangerous today. And then you just say, okay. And then you just sense it, and you literally save your own life without knowing it. Maybe the whole platoon, which I know I've done, where I'm like, there is something going on here, and then I let the commander decide what to do. And inevitably, I was right about that because I'm reading people at a different level. You know, like the details, right? That's what it is. It's those details. When you go through the border, you can sense what is happening, you know, at a level
Absolutely.
that someone else is like, that's just a guy, you know?
Yes, you're exactly right. When you've experienced years and years and years of hostile environment and violence, such as you and I have, there is something that develops within ourselves that allows us to become more preventive, not afraid. It's not fight or flight. It's none of the above. What it is a clear and concise understanding that we have just entered into. I call the cartel land the lion's den. I've always called it that. And you just know when you into a heightened element of understanding in your consciousness immediately integrates. My book, as you've read, explains all of those steps and stages very, very easily for even the layperson to fully understand and get it. And I'm glad that you got to read that book, by the way. And what's your take on it? What is your feeling about the work written in there?
Well, I just like the thing that I took from it was there are so many parallels. We have these completely opposite lives, you know, and it's not just because we're both Sac City alums, but the ability to operate in the wild like that, to see atrocity. I mean, I've met. My job is to find the people that you saw killing people and make them my friends, so that I can be next to the most dangerous people in the area, which is inherently dangerous, by the way. And I want to go back in our conversation a moment and talk about this. When we get to the point where we recognize all of the danger in it because we're good at the conflict zone thing, it then puts you more in the mind of the people who live there every day. And it makes me more empathetic to this is what they deal with every day. You know, I get to go into a camp. I get to go have air conditioning and a heater. And, you know, I have all this luxury and I wouldn't be able to see it unless I spent time out there with and understood. I would say like you can't presume to improve the condition of somebody who you refuse to learn their condition. You know, like what condition is their condition in, you know? And then if I can start by starting there, shutting up and doing that and focused on love, that it's almost always borne out. And it might take them 10, 20, 30, 50 times meeting me to go, this guy just won't stop with the love. I guess I'm going to have to love him back. You'll get there eventually. It's not a one-time thing though.
No. Well, you know what? God commands us to plant the seed, for another will follow behind us to water that seed, and then another will follow behind to reap the harvest. So we know that any works that we do that are a show of good works, this is reflective to the immediate environment, to anybody that gets exposed to that action. I think the main thing, brother, when we're entering those type of environments is to not only show compassion, but by example, share the compassion. And once we start doing that and trust is established, as you know, being in the Afghan villages, once trust is established, other components to that village start coming forth to you because now you are a trusted person in their environment. So we create that through the example. We don't create that through the academics. You know, I have a master's degree in metaphysics, a doctorate in pastoral counseling. My associate's is in chaplaincy. I've got all of the academics down, but, you know, without having the parallel experiences, how effective of a minister do we become if we haven't lived it and walked it and teach the love, the absolute love for one another? And this is where we are in such peril in our country today, brother. This is a crisis event time that we're experiencing with the pandemic. I've known 4 people now since March that have died from COVID. I've known a lot more now infected with it. But I'm here to tell you, this morning I was working with the hospice situation. Last week I did last rites over a very dear lifelong friend of mine's wife. You know, every day we come combative and elemental in crisis events. It's how we approach the event and how we leave the event scenario for those that are in the grieving process or whatever it may be that the survivors are going through is very endemic to the way that God has orchestrated our calling and our servitude, giving him the glory. Never, ever, ever would we seek such things. We're not prideful. We are no longer sinful. We are soldiers of a different type of war, and it's very spiritual war. And it's here, brother. It's on us now. And eschatology was one of my favorites in seminary. I loved to study end of days prophecies. I loved it. And to sit here and watch the unfolding of it in my lifetime, it's pretty remarkable. But yeah.
Yeah, so let me say this, but everybody can get Crisis Victory on Amazon. There's a link right there. If you're listening on the podcast side, as always, it'll be in the show notes. Definitely recommend this book. I mean, there's the spiritual side. There's the super interesting smuggler day side of it. There's so many different aspects, and there's a lot of advice, and the advice that I resonated with and took some things that, because I can always learn more. But I really enjoyed the book, man. I thought it was an easy breezy read. I got through it so fast. And I definitely recommend it to anybody. Anything you want to say just in closing in general? So before we wrap this thing up, it's such a great tale. When I say a book, I mean a movie. I hope that someone gets the rights from it, because it's just an impossible story, just impossible.
And all documented. I have every bit of paperwork to support back and corroborate every statement made. What I would like to say in closing, besides thanking you so very much for your time on air, I'd like to say, and I don't send them to Amazon. What I do is send them to the website. So to go to crisisvictory.com, and this way you can get a prelude to what the book is about. And again, brother, I want to thank you so much. I want to also thank you for your service to our country. I'm glad that you are a survivor. You're a perfect candidate for writing notes in the Crisis Victory site. If more of us tell our stories and come forth with what we have survived, we may save lives. So I'd like to thank you, brother, and God bless you, and continue on in this great and amazing ministry that you have, as I see that this will reach the multitudes. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, stand by. I'm going to sign off.